Good afternoon. My name is Allison Kaplan. I'm Director of Education at the National First Ladies Library, located at the National First Ladies Historic Site in Canton, Ohio. I'm so glad you could join us for today's film discussion. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the film program in a minute, but I want to tell you about some upcoming programs and exhibitions. So the site, the National First Ladies Historic Site, has a new exhibition opening next month related to Nancy Reagan and the Nancy Reagan Centennial. So we're really excited about that. We hope that you can come and visit the site in person and see the great exhibition curated by the National First Ladies Library. But if you can't make it, we will have lots of programs on the horizon throughout the next year related to the exhibition that we're super excited about. But in the coming weeks and months, we have some other cool First Lady opportunities for you to connect with us virtually. So our next film is going to be the Betty Ford story. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how to watch it in a minute here. On April 21st, if you have been a part of our curator series, you may have seen a talk about an object in our collection by Michelle Gullion, our curator and archivist and director of collections. This month, she is handing the microphone over to the director of education from Lincoln's Cottage. We have a really, really interesting program about an exhibition that they have on view about grief and connections to the Lincoln's experience of grief and our contemporary experiences of grief. It's a really interesting and moving exhibition and a great take on some of the social issues and history surrounding First Ladies. I think you'll really enjoy it. So that is available on our Eventbrite to register for right now. And then we will be joined this month, I'm so excited, by Sarah from the Instagram account Cooking with the First Ladies. And on April 25th, we're going to be looking at Betty Ford. So Betty Ford and the Great Awakening, I think that should be a really, really fun program. I'm always super excited, as you know, to talk about Betty Ford. And then for next month's Legacy Lecture, we have another really cool experience. So the first Wednesday in May, you can register through our Eventbrite page. We will be having Anne Hand, who is a really amazing jewelry designer who has designed work for First Ladies. Her work has been on very many powerful women in politics, from Nancy Pelosi to Hillary Clinton. So we're to Laura Bush. So we're super excited about that talk, and that will be a Q&A with her. You'll get to hear about some of the projects she's worked on, see some behind the scenes, hear some stories about the First Ladies, and see some really, really beautiful jewelry. So her stories are exciting and interesting. I think it's one program that you won't want to miss. So a little about our program today and about the film program experience. So we host this film discussion. Through the pandemic, we were teaming up with Stark Library, which is our down the street neighbor. They have this great system called Hoopla, where you can log online and screen a film. We went through, if you were with us, all sorts of documentaries related to sometimes the First Ladies. We watched one about Michelle Obama, to women in sports, skateboarding and wrestling, to social issues that some of the First Ladies had adopted. And we are pretty tapped out on some of those films right now. I'm hoping that we'll find a good one to connect with soon. So we've been asking you all to go out and find some of these films in other places, and we appreciate you doing that. We've been able to, last month we watched a documentary about Polly Murray. which was great, and connect with the Pauli Murray Center. So whenever we can bring in a speaker, someone who can give us a little bit more information about the film, the women featured in the film, or connection, we love that. So sometimes we do a discussion, but we encourage people to add their comments to the chat. This time we're in the webinar format, so we can share this out to a larger audience, but we still want to hear from you. So if you have questions today for our speakers, who I'll introduce in a little bit, please enter them in the chat. Or if you like the movie, love the movie, didn't like the movie, thought it was historically inaccurate, had any opinions on the actors or actresses, please let us know. So next month, we are going to be watching the Betty Ford story, which will be a good one. That's another one like today's where you have to find it online yourself. We try to connect you with as many places as we can to find it. And if you are local to us, Stark Library also has the DVDs available at their branches, which is great. So we don't screen the film here, but we show some clips and we talk about it. It's a really fun discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the movie we're going to discuss today first. It's called Hyde Park on the Hudson. It's a 2012 British historical comedy drama film directed by Robert Mitchell. The film stars Bill Murray as Franklin Roosevelt, Olivia Colman as Queen Elizabeth, and Laura Linney as Margaret Daisy Suckley, a cousin and childhood friend of the president. And we'll get into a little bit of the Eleanor depiction, an actress, in a little bit. It was based on Suckley's private journals and diaries discovered after her death, and fictionally dramatizes her close personal relationship with Roosevelt in the 1939 visit of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth to Roosevelt's countryside estate. So I'm going to show you a preview and then I'll introduce our guests today. So I am going to share my screen yet again. We'll see how this works.
Hello? Who was that?
The president wishes to see me. I'd been invited to visit with Franklin at his home in Hyde Park.
Daisy, what a rad trip.
His mother said he needed to take his mind off his work and the pressures of being the president.
What do you say you and I get out of here? Go someplace quiet.
That spring, Franklin showed me a world I never knew existed.
Where's the police car going?
Sometimes they have to catch a crook or something, I suppose.
And soon we became best friends.
Mr. President, they just left Beacon.
Good. It won't be too long.
No king of England had ever visited America before.
So nice of you to come. Mr. President, forgive me for not getting up.
So Franklin invited them here to the country where we could all relax.
Your mother has now told me for the 10th time not to call her Royal Highness Elizabeth.
Do you mind if I call you Elizabeth? No. No?
It was just one of those
At the
things.
picnic, the president's wife has organized that hot dogs be served as our main dish.
Are they trying to make fun of us?
I don't know.
Just one of those.
It's going to be a big, big success.
Just one of those.
She's obviously his mistress.
Look over there. Just one
The
of those
secretary.
They'll see us.
Red.
I am. So
The king seemed nervous.
Without some help from us, there soon might not be an England to be king of.
We are not going to serve the King and Queen of England in hotels.
Madhouse. Want me as their king? I didn't know they voted for that in England. There's a war. Persuaded to help.
I thought I might have a swim. Come along. No pictures in our bathing suits.
They see all our flaws. That's not what they're looking to find when they look to us.
You too comfy back there?
Yes, thank you.
I now see how important this weekend was. To them, to us, to the world, to Hyde Park on Hudson.
We could have sold tickets for this dinner and made ourselves a pile of money.
So that's a little taste of the film, Hyde Park on the Hudson. And now I want to introduce you to our guests for today's discussion. So today we are joined by the hosts of FLOTUS Forever, a podcast that combines history, feminism, and pop culture and telling the tale of America and the first ladies that shaped it. It's hosted by Claire McGinley and Elyse Marrocco, who we're joined by today. So welcome, ladies. And again, I discovered this podcast when our curator, Michelle, was on, and it's been really fun to listen along to it as you delve into the history of the first ladies. It's really funny, and you always have great takes. So I wanted to start our discussion and get your take on the film. I already see people in the Q&A in the chat saying that they enjoyed it. So what was your take? What did you think?
Elyse, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
Sure, I'll go first.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having us, first of all. Yeah, I never even heard of this movie, so I was shocked to know it was in existence. I liked it. I'm not a huge film buff, so I typically like a lot of things. But I was really curious how they would depict FDR. Once when I heard Bill Murray was playing him, I found that funny to me right off the bat. I was like, interesting choice. And then I was really excited to see how they would depict Eleanor, even the little bit that she's in the film. But overall, I liked it. I enjoyed it. Was surprised by some of it, and liked the relationship we saw between England and U.S. Right before World War II. So that was interesting to see. It played out.
Yeah, I think that it's always interesting when you have these movies that are sort of like framed by like a couple days. So it's like, okay, this weekend is what we're talking about here and what went on this particular weekend, and everything's kind of happening in real time. And so that was kind of a nice look at, of course, what was a massive presidency, an interesting kind of glimpse into sort of a weekend in the life of the Roosevelts. So it was really neat for that reason. And I really enjoyed the woman who played Eleanor.
Yeah, Olivia Williams was her name. I wanted to kind of delve a little bit into her as an actress and how she portrayed Eleanor, but also get into some of the focus, because she wasn't the focus on the film, but she was the one who had this idea to serve hot dogs to the king and queen, and they definitely had some hot takes on it from her mother-in-law, from the royals, and I wanted to get into that with you because Eleanor has this really interesting reputation for not really like embracing some of the hostess aspects of being a first lady, which are pretty much the only like written rules of being a first lady. And you've mentioned a few times on your podcast, there are a few first ladies who were not really interested in that aspect. So I wonder if you could talk about that and her take on food.
Yeah. So in our podcast, we did do a 3-part parter on Eleanor. And that's only because it just feels like there was just like a massive amount of information that we had on her. And just to, give a little history of how Elyse and I have managed our little project that we're doing in terms of the podcast, there isn't really a comprehensive audio understanding of these women. I wanted to learn about some of these earlier women and couldn't find anything. And so we've done, one episode on most of these women, but some of them need 2 or 3. And Eleanor was definitely one of them. And we mentioned when she gets to the White House, kind of how she was going to use that role and make it her own, which is kind of what all of these women do. But Eleanor sort of had, she had some different interests than some of the other women, one of which being diplomacy and policy and being in with people and trying to figure out how to make their lives a little bit easier, a little bit better. And these programs that her and FDR sort of helped to pass, which is pretty remarkable. But something that she wasn't interested in, Allison, to go to your question, of course, is that idea of hosting. And they talk about it in the book, What She Ate, which is a fabulous book we mentioned on our podcast. And it talks about how Eleanor would almost subversively use the hostess duties to kind of like almost like, you know, make herself known in the White House in these moments, even though she didn't necessarily want to be known as like the hostess in that way. So sometimes she would serve FDR food that he didn't really like if she wasn't around, or you know, she hired a woman who was just like one of her really good friends to be the chef at one point at the White House, just because she wanted to kind of prop up women that she loved and knew, which is quite admirable, even though the woman wasn't a very good chef. Legend has it. And then of course, you know, when it comes to the hot dog diplomacy, which it'll later be called, of it all, I think that you know, I think that Eleanor, I sort of, part of me kind of wants to think that maybe she was subversive in the way of like, I don't want to be your traditional host, even though you're the Queen and King of England and I'm welcoming you. I want to kind of do things my own way, especially in the way that she wants to call the Queen Elizabeth. But then another part of me is kind of like, maybe she just wasn't interested in that part at all. And so I think it's just an interesting take. You know, you definitely need a woman like Eleanor to pull something like that off so seamlessly. Though I don't know if I have a specific answer on how intentioned it was, or how, you know, well or not well intentioned it was.
Yeah, I think Eleanor had an air of casualness about her, which I really liked, especially depicted in this film. She, you know, she wants to call, like Claire just mentioned, the Queen Elizabeth and serve the hot dogs. And I don't know, I was also thinking like the era that this takes place in. So it's during the Great Depression. It's right before we get into World War II. And, you know, maybe she was wise to the fact that, yes, having the royal family in America is, you know, a big deal. We want to keep our relationship with England strong, especially right before a war that is happening. But, you know, what is it good optics if you're throwing this big lavish party up at Hyde Park when there's people starving? So my love for Eleanor is like, oh, she's very attuned to this all, and she wants to have a casual dinner, what, you know, Americans might be eating at this point because of the Great Depression, and you know, food might be scarce for some folks. So I like to think that was her take on it as well, and it was, you know, bringing that into the forefront.
Our friend Cindy in the chat mentioned too, there's a really great children's book. I think Eleanor Roosevelt Throws a Picnic, that has some amazing illustrations and delves really deep into this whole experience. But it was the first royal visit to the United States, I mean, ever, which is really interesting. I never thought about it until I was watching that last night, that like this kind of piece of like traditional Americana is like presented to them in the form of food.
And maybe it's fed into, you know, when we have our candidates today go to, you know, the Iowa State Fair, and or they come to New York and they have to eat the slice of pizza, you know, it's like kind of to that, like, I'm the every Joe, and you know, this is us relating to Americans.
What did you think about, in comparison, Sarah Roosevelt's depiction on the screen? She was really intensely into the experience of being a hostess, and her role as kind of the mother-in-law looming in the background.
I mean, I think that we know a lot about Sarah. We probably could have done an episode on Sarah on our podcast. Maybe we will. But she, you know, she was really, she really loved, you know, FDR was her only child, and his father died quite young. So it was kind of the two of them for a while. She famously does not want him to get married to Eleanor. I don't think she wanted him to get married to anybody, so I don't want to put Eleanor down in that way. I think that she was kind of like, nah, I don't, this is my guy. But you know, in terms of being the host, I think she was pretty much the opposite of what Eleanor was trying to do. And she sort of felt that there was a lot more of a grand performance that needed to be put on for these king and queen. And I think that was probably pretty true to form in terms of how Sarah actually was. because she not only didn't find Eleanor's way of being very she didn't really have too much affection for it. And so I have to imagine if there was a party being thrown, they would go pretty opposite directions. She, on the other side, is pretty appalled that Eleanor wants to call the Queen Elizabeth at any point. So, I mean, I think it was pretty true to form. Elyse, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm glad that even though it was just over a few days, they were able to throw in little tidbits of those relationship between Sarah and Eleanor, because we dove into a little bit in the early days of FDR and Eleanor's courtship. Yeah, I mean, she just was not a fan of her. And I don't know if it's a generational thing they had, or just Eleanor was, super feminist of that time. And they just definitely butted heads because that was not Eleanor's vibe. She was not into it. And she's so stubborn and strong-headed that she wasn't even going to give her a tidbit of it. Like she goes and asks the queen, "Can I call you Elizabeth?" Like she's so adamant that, hey, I'm not going to listen to Sarah or my mother-in-law. I am not going to do what I'm supposed to do as first lady. And yeah, I'm so super glad the movie added that in between the dialogue that Eleanor was having with other people and even with her and Sarah.
But then also, like, I think what's interesting, Elyse, when you speak of like the generational difference, I think that there might have been one, but I also think that if you think of a woman like Mamie Eisenhower, or you think of even like, even a Bess Truman, who comes right after Roosevelt, they might have even done a little bit more than what Eleanor did in terms of hostess. So it's like, it definitely had, like, I think that what we're all tapping into in this movie is just like the way that the Roosevelts did things was different. And it was a difference that was, I have to imagine, somewhat craved for. But then also you see it swing back the other way, which we see a lot of times in all of these different administrations. We go really far in one direction and then we swing back in the other direction, even in terms of policy and things. And then when it comes to the White House and the hostess of it all, it could have been that Sarah was in a different generation. It could have been also, they were on her property. At one point, someone says this is her house. So she probably had a lot of stake in the game for sure. But I also think when you think of some of these other more traditional hostesses, they probably would have been right there on Sarah's side saying, I think we need to call her queen. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Mamie Eisenhower would have been curtsying with her fudge, and she would
I was going to say all the fudge.
Sarah was really adopting some of the traditions of former first ladies. So thinking of Lucy Hayes being Lemonade Lucy and wanting to have a dry event, or thinking about the china and having all of the right china service is such a first lady type of duty that we just don't see Eleanor being much interested in.
No,
yeah,
she was,
leading up to Eleanor, a lot of those first ladies were, pigeonholed into this idea of the hostess, and that's your job. That is the role, or the role that it became to be defined as. And Eleanor stepped in and she was like, no, I'm into the politics. Like, I'm ready to help with the New Deal and, be part of the administration in that way, policy wise. And that was the first time we see that. And we, fortunately, I think, see it more as we get into modern history, as we, with Betty Ford and with Hillary Clinton for sure. So I think that was the first time we really see it head on with Eleanor. So it seems so jarring.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, it's what was going to say? I was going to say something in terms of, I forget. Okay. Maybe it'll come back to me.
One of the things that I liked a lot about the film was the way that it used King George and Queen Elizabeth to kind of give exposition that the audience might not know about who these people are. So they're kind of gossiping and getting background information on the Roosevelts, and they're like, his mom lives here and he lives here with his mom, and then she lives in this cottage, and this woman is the secretary, but she's also having an affair with FDR, and that person is the cousin, but could that person also be involved with FDR romantically? So that, I thought that provided some nice exposition, but it was also funny because they were just like, what's going on?
Royals, they're just like us, you know, they just what to do. Yeah.
Yeah, they just want to gossip about their like friends that they're at their house for the weekend. What I was gonna say though, I do remember, and it's related, Allison, is that like I really appreciated how Eleanor and FDR's relationship was depicted in this movie, because like so much of the movie is centered around FDR and his sort of like mistresses, affairs, whatever you'd like to call them, sort of stepping outside the marriage. But it really showed FDR and Eleanor getting along and having fun together. And you know, every relationship is different and every relationship has different parameters. And theirs was very much one of being diplomatic in all of these different ways. And I thought that it was really neat to see them as friends, because even as Elyse and I learned about FDR, we were kind of like, did they like each other? I don't know, you know, and it's hard to know. And I think that I really appreciated that it depicted them as like working partners in this like really long partnership, which at no point were they not going to be in once it kind of reached the point of presidency. So, but to go back to that, I think it's like all the more gossip, right? Like, oh, and now he's getting along with his wife. This is so strange, even though there's all of this background noise.
For as much criticism as this movie got for the way that it treated some of the romantic relationships in the film, you're right. The way that it approached the relationship between Eleanor and FDR, I pulled this quote from the film. It said, "People said their marriage was troubled and unhappy, that they lived mostly separate lives, but I never saw that. That's not how they seemed when they were together." So they obviously had this caring partnership, and the movie really went out of its way to talk about that or not, you know, sort of say they were unhappy that all this was happening behind her back. So that was an interesting take on it, I thought. What did you think?
Yeah. Well, okay, Elyse, you want to talk?
Sorry.
So excited.
On their interaction when Daisy discovers that Missy is also a mistress of the president, she makes a comment. I don't know the exact quote, I'm paraphrasing, but like, you know, Eleanor knows, and there's others pretty much. So like, if you want to be part of the gang, like this is how it is. You know, they're all very casual about it. And yeah, I think it's, you know, who knows what their arrangement was. You know, that's for history to tell. She burned letters. Let's not forget, as our famous first lady is always burning letters. You'll discover that. So you know, who knows what we're missing in history between them, but. Yeah, I think their relationship was, you know, they had not an arrangement, but some sort of understanding of how they were going to work together in a partnership. And, you know, I think in their own way, that's really beautiful and great. And they were able to partner and do great things for the country. And I love that scene when they're all serving coffee on the lawn and she's pushing FDR back to the house, and they're talking about Hick and some event that was happening in DC. And, you know, again, there's the rumors between Eleanor and Hick and their relationship. So like they all just have this understanding, and Missy's there, and Daisy is in the background and seems a little like, oh, okay, like everyone's just talking out loud about these things. And, you know, I think that was her first maybe view into what their relationships all were together.
Yeah, and to go back just to the original idea of framing it in the lens of the royals, you know, it's like there is so much, there's so many rules involved in the monarchy from what I understand. And we haven't done a deep dive yet into that. Maybe second season, we'll see. But, you know, there are so many rules in terms of what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And these rules feel ancient, right, in terms of the British monarchy. But American history is so new and so young. And so it's an interesting look, especially from the perspective that Elyse and I have, where it's like each one of these ladies gets into the White House, and like, sure, there are things that like come along that, you know, they like have to now they hold the Bible because of Lady Bird Johnson, or, they host the different parties or the Easter egg roll, all these different things. But for the most part, there just aren't these old archaic rules. And so I think for the royals to see this sort of like dynamic, moving, breathing family that is playing by their own rules, I think was probably pretty striking for them, because each first lady kind of gets to make up their own rules in a lot of ways.
I love thinking back now, like the two of them gossiping at the window. Like, if any family should not be gossiping, it's the British monarch. Like, so
And they do allude to why he became the king. So the filmmaker of this film made the previous his previous film was The King's Speech, which was all about the king overcoming his stutter, but he became king because his brother had a relationship with an American woman, and so had abdicated to be with her. So that became interesting, I think, piece of the film. And like FDR kind of becomes this fatherly figure to him, but I think it was also interesting to see the way that Americans there kind of reacted to it. Like, oh, like, are you going to have like an American queen one day? Or like how they approached it was really interesting.
Yeah, I definitely think they, it's interesting. The relationship between FDR and the king is really, there's that one scene where they're drinking in the office together. And, I think they definitely were sort of acknowledging their own faults in the way of not even faults, I shouldn't say, but sort of like things that make their own lives challenging. So polio or this stutter, and what that's like to be on this high sort of profile, have a high profile in a country, and then still have these like things that are making it even trickier. And so that was an interesting sort of parallel between the two of them that I appreciated. And it of course made those characters super dynamic for lots of reasons. And it's, the movie is dominated by female characters, which is interesting, but then you have these two male characters that are quite dynamic as well.
I was just trying to think, I hadn't thought about it before, if this movie passes the Bechdel test, and I don't know that it does. So the Bechdel test is when two women in a film talk about something other than a man.
Yeah, I don't think so, because even in the barn scene, Eleanor is, she's referring to the king that abdicated or would have been king. So like, yeah, they're still talking about men, and they're worried about his whole FDR sinus infection or whatever. So I'm like, it's so close to passing the Bechdel test.
I know. I had to look up who made the movie because I wanted to see if it was made by a man or a woman, because you have all of these female characters. There's so many of them, but they're a little flat, all of them, and I said to Elyse, we were talking last night, I said, I don't know much about the filmmaker, but I think he probably had like a bunch of older sisters or something. I had to guess. Or like had an older sister who had like a lot of cool friends or something, because it just seems like there is an effort to like have these women having conversations about other things, but I don't know if it worked. And then you see these incredibly dynamic male characters, and it sort of jogs you a little bit. For me, it did. I was like, wow, this movie's about them now? How did that happen?
So I want to touch a little bit on Daisy, because even though I've, read that big giant biography about Eleanor Roosevelt, she was not a character that I was familiar with in the Roosevelt's lives. So she was a cousin of FDR, Margaret Daisy Suckley. And I was most interested or surprised that she was the person who gave them their dog that became so well known, Fela. But as far as, and I'm most of the criticism that I saw about this film came from that relationship, and that there was even a Roosevelt who wrote a response to the film and said that there was no romantic relationship between the two of them, but there was a definite friendship. And again, a lot of the film came out of letters and journals that Daisy kept, and that she was there when FDR died, but she's not one of these women like Missy Lehan who we hear a lot about when it comes to FDR and his relationships with women. So I wanted to know if Daisy was a woman that you had encountered in your research on Eleanor, or was she kind of a new character in this for you?
She was good for me. I mean, we, you know, in our research for Eleanor, Missy came up, of course, Lucy came up. But yeah, Daisy, I was unaware of. I didn't realize that he had such a close relationship with her. And the movie didn't really give a lot of exposition on their relationship. I think it made a reference they were childhood friends or something, but it kind of just starts right off. She gets the phone call that Franklin wants to see her. So I was really, I'm curious. I want to do more research, and you know, if it's based off her letters, you gotta, I guess, use her. It's of course her interpretation of their relationship. So you know, who knows the full story again? But yeah, I was really curious again, she's sort of a flat character. Like she's almost just like a little puppy dog around Franklin, and you know, even that one scene when she she discovers that he's having the affair with Missy, and she imagines what she would say to him, and she like screams at him, and then it cuts and she's like, but I didn't say that. She just walked out. So, you know, I wish we saw her come to her full, you know, power. But yeah, she was an interesting character. I wish there was a little bit more about her, that I knew more about her.
Yeah, she was new for me too, but I do think it's she was sort of the only character who was in this like almost more traditional female role in the movie. And so it was interesting to see FDR's like almost reaction to that, because the movie has all of these really strong women. Even Queen Elizabeth is like, what are we doing here? Like, you know, she's questioning the whole time. And so then you have Daisy, who is maybe this more demure, sort of just like in the background, as Elyse is describing, but almost like just kind of trying to do her best and follow along, but there's just like so many strong personalities around her. And so it was kind of nice to have that balance in a lot of ways, and see sort of FDR's reaction to having someone like that around, because that's certainly not what the company perhaps he was used to keeping, though I don't know a lot about Lucy Mercer either. Maybe she was similar, but no, she was new to me too, though I'm not surprised that she existed. I have to be honest. I think that's something we do know about FDR. Yeah.
So the biographer of FDR, Jeffrey Ward, said FDR's relationship with Daisy was an extremely old-fashioned sort of 19th century one. They wrote each other letters and may have kissed once in a car on a hilltop, which I think we got to experience in the film. It was the delight of her life to be the friend of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And then Curtis Roosevelt was a little bit more angered by the film. He said, to play with history as the background for a good story is one thing. To reach into history and snatch out well-known historical figures and make them say and do what you want to produce a sexy film is quite another. So that was interesting. But the idea of this sort of like 19th century romance and the letter writing really reminded me of some of the discussion around Eleanor and Hick. So some of the historians say like, this is just the way that women were. They wrote these letters and they said, I love you. And they gave kisses and hugs. And this was kind of the same approach. So I thought that was a little bit interesting.
Yeah, and I think you can't ever underestimate what the role of power does in these circumstances. You know, like, sure, perhaps it was from Daisy's perspective different than FDR's perspective, because FDR is in the role of power and Daisy is coming alongside that. And so what does that do to a person? You know, it makes a person feel and think and do things that are a little out of the realm of, you know, if another person is sort of more objectively watching, maybe it's that, but Daisy's view is subjective. And I think it's important to maybe have that be heard, because we do have a lot of FDR's voice being heard in history.
Yeah, agree. I think that's, you know, important to at least take what her depiction and her interpretation of it was, and tell the story. You know, women need to have their stories told too, whether it's salacious. I don't know if Curtis's description of sexy is a little much, I think, but you know, it's like what Claire said before, it's believable what we know of FDR. Cindy in the chat says, you know, I love FDR him as a president, not as a man. And I think that's a great way to describe it, because he, you know, did not have the best interpersonal relationships, you know, as a man. I think he was very casual and careless with some of them.
I wanted to ask you all a little bit about, we talked about this film and we talked about the depiction of Eleanor in the film, but there's a new film on the horizon, I think Showtime has coming out, that focuses on 3 different first ladies, Michelle Obama, Betty Ford, and Eleanor Roosevelt, which includes, who is it, the lady from the X-Files is playing?
Jillian,
Yeah,
Gillian
Anderson. And Gillian Anderson. Gillian Anderson's playing Eleanor.
So I wanted to kind of ask you about depictions of first ladies on film. Do you think that there's one that's really great, or who is missing in film? And what movie star do you imagine playing that first lady?
This is my dream, because pretty much every episode we pitch a show idea to Ryan Murphy.
Yeah.
And want Sarah Paulson to play every role, pretty much is how it turns out. Yeah, I don't know if there's like a really like great first ladies depicted in film. I think like the first one that comes to mind is Sally Field. She plays Mary Todd, and I think that's just because she was like, you know, my dream was to play Mary Todd, and then she got to play her, which seems like a little random. But yeah, I mean, I would love to see a full film on Eleanor. I think she's so dynamic, and she did so much, like pre-White House, during the White House, and post too, because she lived, I think, like 17 years or something after they left the White House. So I would love to see like a really great biopic on her. I don't know who would play her, Sarah Paulson maybe, if anyone knows her. But to have a full story in her like lens, I think would be really interesting. Yeah, what about you, Claire? Do you have a favorite depiction?
Yeah, I mean, I just think any of these like I'm so excited for this Showtime thing. I really am, because I think it'll be so neat. I think Elyse and well, perhaps Elyse, I don't want to speak for you, but I certainly at this point take for granted how much I've been able to digest and learn about the first ladies. So I don't think that a lot of what we're going to see on this show is maybe common knowledge, even though for me, it feels a little bit like common knowledge because we end up digesting it and talking about it. That said, so I'm really excited for that, but I also want like some of these more, I don't even know if obscure is the right word to say, but just ladies that we don't know about. Someone that I totally fell in love with when doing this podcast has been Louisa Adams, who was John Quincy Adams' wife. She was marvelous. She was a poet. She was a singer. She had a sense of humor. I know when we were visiting, when we interviewed Michelle, you at the First Ladies National Library have a note that she wrote to somebody after she had borrowed some type of a lampshade or something, or a chandelier, and she wrote like, "You really lit up the event" or something. You know, she had like a sense of humor. And John Quincy Adams was a total crab. He was so grumpy, and she just like was just so lovely and seemingly accepting of his crabbiness, because he actually had a lot of really cool ideas too. So I would just love an like more comprehensive look into that presidency. And there are some great books on her too. So I think that it wouldn't be hard to come by. And then the other one, and I can't believe Harriet Lane. I was going to say James Buchanan's niece. I think that those would be my two, because those are just women that I knew nothing about, and then found out about them and just fell in love with them. And Harriet Lane lived so long after James Buchanan died. And she was put into a very, very difficult situation as the first lady when the Civil War is just on the brink, and James Buchanan is like truly doing just about nothing to help. And then she's sort of needing to, I know we joked that like her whole first lady was just like moving around seating arrangements because they would try and throw parties and it would go badly every time because the Civil War was so under the surface. But she ended up doing so much incredible work after the being first lady. So I would love to see Louisa Adams and Harriet Lane. Those are my picks.
Michelle's in the chat too, cheering you on for Harriet
Yay!
Lane.
Yeah, I want to see a Grace Coolidge too. I really felt Grace Coolidge, and I know it has a lot to do with her pet raccoon that I became obsessed with. But yeah, just these women that we don't really hear about. You know, we have the biggies in history that come up, but I think there's so many of them, and no matter what side of the aisle they were on, no matter whether the presidency was quote unquote good or bad, there's something at least I found, Claire, you can say this yourself, but I related to them with, and I really found something, just even a nugget of their lives that was like, all right, I get you, girl. Like you're trying and you're doing good and you're doing
good. I mean, they're put into, and you know, we say it on a podcast all the time. We always try and channel Michelle. And now that I know she's in the chat, I'm going to shout her out even more because I think, you know, she has such compassion for these women for being put in like what is sort of an impossible situation. There are so many protocols, but there are almost no rules. And there are so many expectations, but there are almost no boundaries within those expectations. And so it's very difficult to enter into this role. And they are, you know, Elyse say it all the time, at the end of the day, these are all just people. And so I think anything to humanize these people is really what we are after. But I do know that this special is not going to stop. They're going to keep doing it. So I think they're going to do a 3 at a time. But I watched a segment.
Tip, Claire, thanks.
Well, I watched my Sunday morning segment on it, which you know I love.
Love a Sunday morning. Yes, Sunday morning.
So we'll see who they choose next as their next 3. Yeah. We'll be on the edge of our
We'll tweet them. Give us your comments. Give us your picks and we'll tweet them.
Oh yeah. Let's hear in the comments. And you mentioned I was doing some research before we were talking about Eleanor Roosevelt on film, and there's really no film that's just about Eleanor Roosevelt. She's always like the secondary character, whether it's focusing on FDR and his experience, or she's in a dramatization of the Tuskegee Airmen, or remember growing up watching the film Annie and not even thinking that she is there, but Annie has a visit with FDR and Eleanor is there. So there's no depiction of Eleanor, just Eleanor, which is really wild.
Yeah,
so I know when I was thinking of my favorite depiction of Eleanor, I was like the Ken Burns special, like the Roosevelt's doc. Like, I don't really know.
I can show you. I'll show you our little PowerPoint that we pulled together so you can get a better idea of what's kind of out there. Oh, it wasn't this one. This is our upcoming programs. Okay, let's see.
Well, I think, and also there was something that I want to watch. In 2005, Cynthia Nixon played her, which is
yes.
I haven't seen that. I don't know anything about that, but
I do love the Busy Phillips drunk history depiction.
So good.
Great. Yeah, we need a full length feature on Eleanor.
Let's see if I can pull this up. So we've got some images of Eleanor. We were talking about hot dog diplomacy. So here's some other. Eleanor was maybe the first, but she has not been the last. And we can see Lady Bird there on the right. Of course, she's a Southerner, so she's got her barbecue and hot dog on. And Bill Clinton here on the left, serving hot dogs, possibly at Camp David. Here we have the actual royal visit, the swimming pool. Here's what it looked like in the film. Here's what it really looked like. Another side by side of the performance. Royals. I love how they pulled the costumes from the photos, like the florals here with I think Sarah.
Like exact costume.
So here they are. Oh, this is a little bit out of focus, but you can see here's the menu that they had: Virginia ham, hot dogs, cold turkey, sausages, cranberry jelly, green salad, strawberry shortcake, coffee, rolls, beer, and soft drinks.
That sounds like a really fun picnic.
Sounds really good. Here's Daisy's one of the pages from her journal that talked about the experience. And here she is, I believe, with Fela. Okay, so here are the films. So Sunrise at Campobello was one of the ones that depicted Franklin and this challenge when he faced polio. I'm not sure of the year of that one. We can watch the trailer if you want. We can do one trailer here. Maybe, maybe not. Oh, here it is.
This is the story of a man. It is a story of marriage, children, and happiness, of drama and devotion and courage. But most of all, it is the story of one man's tremendous triumph over adversity, a story that would have to be told, even if his name hadn't been Franklin D. Roosevelt.
How do I look? Snappy?
Never better.
This was one of the most talked about men of our time. We all knew the public figure that led us through so many challenging years. But here now is the story of the private years before. Before the applause and the glory and the shouting.
I sometimes wonder how many of your cousins are still confounded that we married. You think they still consider me a feather duster?
Franklin, there are undoubtedly some members of your family who still believe that you didn't get much of a bargain.
Ralph Bellamy in the role that won him Best Actor of the Year award on the stage as Franklin Roosevelt, before he was known as FDR.
It's a hard way to learn humility. But I've been learning by crawling. I know what's meant. You must learn to crawl before you can walk.
Greer Garson as Eleanor Roosevelt, hailed as one of the great performances of the season.
Oh, Louis, I'd be no good at it. I can't lecture. I giggle at the wrong times, and I can't control my voice when I think I'm whispering, I'm shouting.
Hume Cronin as Louis Howe, the friend who couldn't forget the future.
I'm no idle dreamer, Franklin. Working with you is an act of faith. I believe God has an eye on your future. God has an infinite variety of tasks. I don't believe he's available as a campaign manager.
Gene Hagen is personal secretary Missy Lehan.
Thanks, Missy. That's perfect.
If you need fresh ones, a call will bring you our instant courteous service.
Ann Shoemaker is Sarah Delano Roosevelt.
You know my feelings about politics generally.
I do.
It's a tawdry business for a man, and I believe shocking for a woman.
A letter reached me. I'd like to have you here, Father.
Frank, you handle that chair like a scooter.
Practice makes perfect, Al.
I don't know what you mean. I only know that your stubbornness is not only your strength, but your weakness, and you need...
I needn't do anything. I am not going to let myself go down a drain. A bad beating either breaks the stick or the student. Well, I'm not broken.
So that's a little taste of what other depictions of Eleanor and FDR on film, and Sarah and Missy Lehan are there too. So that's from 1960 Sunrise at Campobello. Let's see. Ooh, gonna keep rolling. This one was a mini series made for TV film. We'll skip the clips. Here's some other film depictions. The White House years, the 1977 miniseries. Here's Annie.
Oh, yeah.
I never like made the connection. It was one of those things. I guess I wouldn't have even known who FDR was at the time
Yeah.
to make the connection that that was Eleanor. Here she is in the Tuskegee Airmen film. The Cynthia Nixon. We have some pictures of Cynthia Nixon as Eleanor, which would have been really cool to see. I've got to check that one out. And of course, Busy Phillips on Drunk History. So that's a little through Eleanor on film. So to wrap up today, I wonder if you can tell us just a little bit more about what's coming up on the podcast, who you're going to be discussing, and where we can find you online.
Yeah, we have some exciting things coming up. Our next First Lady is going to be Betty Ford. We just did our episode on Pat Nixon, and we've agreed that from here on out, they probably are going to be two-parters, only because the wealth of knowledge about these women is so great. And we know that attention spans are finite. So we also know that
I can't shut up.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So we'll be definitely doing Betty Ford is coming up next. And then we also are going to be going back to Ohio. We're coming back to interview a person, the caretaker of the Lucy Webb Hayes house. And we'll also be interviewing Dr. Catherine Jellison, who has written extensively on the First Ladies. And we're really excited about both of those things coming up.
Yeah, I also want to drag Claire back to Hyde Park because we had a trip planned during the holidays, but unfortunately the COVID surge held us back. And we had to be safe, so we postponed that trip. So hopefully we'll have a bonus app that throws us back to the Roosevelt era, because Hyde Park is so beautiful. If anyone lives in New York or comes to New York, definitely check that out. I went there a few years ago with my parents, and it was so fun. We had such a good time. But yeah, so Betty Ford's coming up. Follow us on Instagram at FLOTUS Forever. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, and yeah, check it out and comment. Let us know what you want to hear.
Thank you so much, ladies. This was really wonderful. It was so fun to interface with you in person, and we hope to have you back another time to talk more about First Ladies. And I love the idea of First Ladies on the road. Michelle and I keep talking about road trips. We really want to go to Gettysburg and check out the Eisenhower House and see the pink bathroom in person.
Yeah.
So plan an episode around that. Maybe we'll meet up with you.
Oh, we would love that. No, thank you so much for having us. This is like so special. We could talk about this stuff all day. So thank you very much. We'd be happy to do it again.
Yeah, thank you for having us. And thank you for joining.
Claire and Elyse, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for joining us for today's discussion. And we hope to see you back at one of our other National First Ladies Library programs. Connect with us on Facebook or through our Eventbrite page to find out more about our upcoming programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.